Okay, hello and welcome to a new episode of the KewCast. I'm John. I'm joined again by my good friend Eddie. How you doing, buddy?
All good. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's been a trip.
I took a trip. You took a trip.
Yeah.
And now we're back.
Yeah, that's right. You want to talk about your trip?
Just a personal trip to D.C. I'm from the D.C. area, so
Okay.
I have obligations that send me back from time to time.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into my trip in a sec, but first I'd like to introduce the sponsor of today's show, which is, again, pickleballbluebook.com.
And get to 11.
Yeah. So it's a service you can use to appraise your paddle's worth. You just go on, enter your paddle model and the brand and the condition, and it'll give you an estimate on what you can sell it person to person. So if you want to sell it like on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, go check that out, and it's a good place to start. Yeah, so thank you, Get to 11, for sponsoring the show. So let's move on to latest news. And today's pod is going to be dominated by my trip to both Florida and Baltimore last week. So people have been hearing about the news coming out from paddle companies and podcasters and paddle reviewers and other media in pickleball concerning the USAP Media Day, which happened on Friday of last week at the lab of Element U.S. Space and Defense, which is where they're running their paddle testing program.
So you're media now.
I'm media, isn't that crazy?
Press credentials and everything.
So the media there was me, Chris Olson, Braden, Rafa from that Pickleball Tech Dude, and John from Speak Pickleball, who, by the way, if you want to get a really good article to read about what happened at the USA Media Day, go check out John's article at Speak Pickleball. I'll put a link to that in the description. A really fantastic breakdown of in great details of everything that transpired at that meeting. So go check that out. And yeah, so I'll get to that meeting in a second, but we were the media there, and suddenly I'm like, wait a second. This isn't in my job description. I just like to look at paddles. I'm not supposed to be media here, but I'm really glad I went.
Give yourself a pay raise now. So no actual press there.
No.
Okay, gotcha.
I guess we are press.
Yeah.
All right, so let me back up first. So I took a double trip. Earlier in the week, I went to Boca Raton, Florida, where PPL Lab is, Pro Pickle Labs, and that is the lab that services UPA-A in their paddle certification program, right? They do it both on-site, and they have this lab in Boca Raton. So they invited me down, and I got a chance to check out their lab, interview their engineers and their staff, and that was a great time. And then I went straight from there. That was Tuesday. I had a couple of days to spare, and then I went up to Baltimore for the USAP Media Day. So it was great to be able to compare those two labs directly and see what was going on in both. So let me do this chronologically. And by the way, by the time this podcast comes out, I'll already have a video out comparing the two labs and showing footage from those. So if you want more details on this, then you can go check that out. But yeah, first Boca Raton, so Pickle Pro Labs visited on Tuesday. One point of clarification that I was confused on is that PPL, this lab, is independently owned and operated. It's not funded by UPA-A. So UPA-A is contracting to PPL to, as the lab that does their paddle certification program, right? So, I mentioned before about the bridge loan that PPA got. I thought maybe most of that was going to the lab. That's not the case. They're not buying the equipment. The equipment is all purchased by the owner of PPL. And they, could potentially contract out to other people as well. And you can certainly, that they have services that you can send paddles in to get, COR tested and that sort of thing. So that was a point of clarification I wanted to make. I met their primary engineers. I didn't get to meet Patrick. He kind of sits above everything. He wasn't in town that day. But Patrick Drain, he comes from UMass Lowell, so that's a big center for sports testing, one of the two big centers. And at UMass Lowell, he was the assistant director of baseball at the Baseball Research Center. Curtis Cruz was there. Curtis is another one of their lead engineers. He is from Washington State University, the other big center for sports testing equipment in the U.S., Curtis's mentor was Lloyd Smith, who developed PBCoR, right? The baseball coefficient of restitution. So bat, ball, coefficient of restitution. And he's been instrumental in setting the standards together with Patrick at UMass Lowell ever since, right? They both are fully integrated into this. And Curtis was a student of, and his mentor was Lloyd Smith. So Curtis is just a wealth of knowledge about coefficient of restitution. They're building this laboratory specifically for pickleball.
So, John, before you just get too far into it, for those that are just getting to us and kind of catching up on what we're talking about, just quickly talk about what CoR is.
Oh, yeah. Coefficient of restitution. It's just a means of measuring basically power of a paddle. And the specifics, that's a broad general statement, but the specifics is you're firing a ball with a cannon at a clamped paddle and measuring the inbound and outbound velocity, and a whole bunch of other stuff goes into that equation. It's not just a ratio of inbound versus outbound. But yeah, you can think of the score, of COR score, 0.43, for example, is what USAP uses. Mm-hmm. That is an outbound velocity of 43% of the incoming velocity. So if you're shooting a ball at 100 miles an hour at the paddle, it's coming off at 43 miles an hour. Given lots of other variables in there.
Sure.
There's swing weight, there's center percussion, and all these other things that kind of tweak that number. We'll get into the details of that.
But generally, it is that sort of relationship between, energy coming in versus coming off.
How efficient is a paddle at returning energy?
Perfect.
Yeah. All right. So, and then there are other engineers at PPL. I'll leave that to the video I'm making now, so if you guys want to see who they are. All right, so what are the differences? What differences did I see? I'll kind of generalize those first. Between the PPL, so the UPA-A's lab, versus the Element U.S. Space and Defense lab, which USAP uses. Mm-hmm. I'll get into more details about that organization in a second and my visit there. But the gist of it, I want to wrap this up really quick in a nice bow, with a nice bow. The USAP uses the term PBCoR, so paddle ball coefficient of restitution, and their limit is 0.43. UPA-A, so the PPL lab, their term for this is paddle efficiency factor, so PEF. They're not using the term PBCoR. And the reason why they didn't want to confuse the two, because they're getting different numbers because they're using slightly different methods. They're using the same formula, but slightly different methods to get there. So the maximum PEF used by the PPL and UPA-A is 0.385. So 0.43 for the
PBCoR
USAP, and 0.385 for UPA-A. Okay? They're also using different balls. So we've seen that ball without holes, the Franklin ball without holes that USAP is using. Well, UPA-A and PPL is using the current PPA ball, which is the Vulcan V-Flight Pro, with holes in it. And they do a lot of work to calibrate those balls, which I'll talk about in a second. So there was a kind of a general idea that why is UPA-A using a ball with holes? This can be a lot more inconsistent than a ball without holes. Well, there's a really good reason for that. So key takeaways from the PPL lab visit. So they are testing paddle break-in. That's a big difference. USAP, so far as we know, will not do that. And this year, as you can see in their guidelines PDF that they have up, this is going to drive me crazy.
It's like walking across your grandmom's floors in the old farmhouse.
The camera's just a little off kilter there. But so you can look at their guidelines pamphlet and for the UPA-A, and they have an allowance this year to go up to 0.405 PEF. So the paddle can break in up to that, and then starting in March 1st of next year, 2026, they won't be able to exceed the current limit of 0.385. Okay, so the idea is to get
even after break-in.
Even after break-in, the idea is to get paddle companies currently who may have a break-in period, but their paddles are still legal. Give them a little grace period, and then eventually you're gonna have to start. If your paddle breaks in, you're gonna have to start below the limit and then have it break in up to that limit,
or design something that has no break-in or
very
little.
Exactly, and they are. I was just talking with the lab director today, Gary, and he said that he has made the final installment on a payment of a device that breaks in paddles. And they're not releasing, they'll get that information out to us soon in terms of what actually that looks like and what it does to the paddle, but they're not revealing that information.
That's intriguing.
Just yet. Yeah, it's not just percussion. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Another big takeaway point, ball qualification. Yes, they're using the Vulcan ball with holes, but they're doing a whole bunch of work and they've done a bunch of research to get to this point where they can qualify the ball. So they divide the ball into quadrants. So imagine even what they call seamless or weldless balls, they do have a seam on them, right? And it's you can see on like Franklin X40s and all the unwelded balls, they have this seam going around the perimeter. They're calling that the equator, and then the opposite ends the poles, right? So that has a big effect on how the ball returns energy if you hit it on the equator versus the poles. And they did all of this data entry and analysis and figured out that each quadrant of the ball behaves differently, right? And
that's crazy.
Each ball, one to the other, behaves very differently. Curtis was saying, man, if you think paddles show a lot of differences, imagine like even the same model of ball, one to the other can be vastly different. So they calibrate each ball by firing it at a steel block and getting the ball's own coefficient of restitution per quadrant. And then they take that ball and they align it in a piston cannon. So the piston cannon like shoots a piston at it, and you're able to determine exactly which part of the ball is going to hit the paddle that way. Instead of like what I have, which is the air cannon, and the ball's kind of spinning a little bit. You don't know where exactly the ball's going to hit. So they know exactly which quadrant it's going to hit, and then they calculate after they get the actual PBCoR or PEF results back from the computer. They calibrate that based on what the COR of the ball, the quadrant of the ball, was during that. A lot of work to do this, but they said it's hugely important because if not, then it could lead to misleading results.
So they almost like tear it out for the ball, as you know we would do with a swing machine. They're doing it with their their testing machine.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Okay, what else? So another reason why they're using balls with holes. So in addition to calibrating the ball, you could do that with a holeless ball also, right? But the reason why they're doing it with holes is because balls with holes, as you would imagine, do behave differently than balls without holes. Balls without holes are going to be more structurally sound than those with holes, and especially at high speeds or high impact speeds. So you can imagine balls with holes are going to have more flex, and they're going to flatten out a little more than ones without. And not only are they saying that the holes, there's differences in how they perform, but it's not a linear difference. It's not like the balls without holes just perform faster across the gamut of inbound velocity. It's you see different trajectories of the balls and then different drop-offs at different speeds. So and at the relevant speeds that we play pickleball at. It's not like 500 miles an hour. It's like between 20 and 60 miles an hour, there's big differences in balls. So that could lead to more misleading results in their estimation. So that's the reason why they're using the ball with the holes. Lastly, last takeaway point, spin tests. They're doing spin tests. I'll leave the details in the video that will come out before this podcast, but suffice it to say they're clamping the paddle at 30 degrees, and it's not swinging back like on the coefficient of restitution test. It's clamped in a steady state, and they're collecting high-speed imagery, high-speed video of the ball, and they have a computer that analyzes the spin of the ball, and they're able to get. And the paddle that they tested while I was there, they shoot the ball at 40 miles an hour at the paddle at 30-degree angle. 1900 RPM. I would have never thought in a million years you could get 1900 RPM by firing a ball at 30 miles an hour at a clamped paddle at a 30-degree angle. But it was right there in front of me. I saw it in real life. So it's true.
So I'm just curious, John, like what's your first impression when you walk into, either or both of the labs? I mean, I think I have this image of this super like high-tech, very sort of almost science fiction-y kind of setup, but what is it? Is it like that, or is it? Yeah,
it's really high tech. Okay. We've got millions of dollars worth of equipment in there, and I mean it's utilitarian. It's not like they have a lot of artwork on the walls or anything like that. But there's huge air compressor, all this equipment, all these stations. There's a office up front, and I didn't see the back, what was going like the side of the offices, but and it's staffed by 6 to 8 people like that I saw there, all of which are really qualified. So it's a legitimate operation, as you would expect.
What's their runtime for evaluating a paddle?
Oh, so they say that they spend most of the time on the ball. The ball takes up the majority of the time. So it's like an hour per paddle, I think was, or more.
Wow.
Yeah. So not a small investment of labor.
Right.
All right, let's move on to Baltimore. So Thursday I flew into Baltimore. Friday morning, bright and early, 8 a.m. We all met at Element U.S. Space and Defense Lab, where USAP was hosting this event for the media. And when I say media, it was the people I mentioned who are in the paddle space, as well as some paddle companies. So we had Rafa from Gearbox, Yola had a couple of representatives, a representative from Selkirk, Holbrook, Paddle Tech, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple of others, but there were a lot of paddle company attendees in the audience as well. So they started off with a presentation from the USAP. So Mike Neely, the CEO, got up and kind of introduced everything. Then John Anderson, their chief engineer, got up and spoke for a bit. Carl Schmitz, who is their CTO, chief technical officer, who deals with all the equipment, also talked for a bit. And then they took us on the equipment tour. So they took us back into the laboratory. And we got to look at the ball cannon, which is made from the same factory that PPL uses. It's slightly different configuration. So instead of the piston cannon, they have, I forget what it's called, but it's powered by air, just like the piston cannon is at PPL, but there's like a canister almost that pushes the ball out. So it also is a knuckleball, meaning it doesn't spin and it can control which part of the ball hits the paddle, but they don't control for that. Their reasoning is that the ball is without holes, so it's more consistent than a ball with holes. But as we saw from the PPL, or we heard from the PPL, based on their data, it does impact the ball in terms of where the ball impacts. So it does make a difference in terms of if it impacts on the equator versus the poles, and actually which quadrant, even balls without holes. So that's something I would love some clarification on, and moving forward, seeing which results actually are more accurate based on gut checks, right? Because we've heard some kind of wonky results come out for PBCoR on different paddles, like certain companies' paddles, their control paddles are getting higher PBCoR results than their power paddles. And based on how they play, that's not what you would think, right? Okay, anyway, so we saw that very similar system, like I said, to PPL. And they also have some of the same equipment as well. The baseball cannon was sitting right next to in the same room, so they also work with baseball, softball bats, and that equipment was very similar as well. And they're adopting the same formula, which is, PBCoR is based on BBCoR.
So how do they control for a spin in the baseball situation? Because that I could see would make quite a bit of difference.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I imagine the baseball, they're able to control for spin for sure, and impact the ball where they want to. But maybe they're doing it between the seams,
right,
on a certain part of the ball that is consistent. I don't know. But I found it interesting that, maybe they are aligning the ball, and I got that information wrong so that the pole hits versus equator, but I pretty sure I asked John. I'll go back and look at the video whether or not they positioned the ball in any certain way, and I think his answer was no. All right. So yeah, when we looked through there, we saw some of their X-ray equipment. So something cool that's coming from USAP is they're using 3D scans on paddles, and they're able to look at thin sections of the paddle and rotate it, and you can detect core crushing that way. You can see the cells, polypropylene cells, that are crinkled up and crushed. So that'll be a good addition to their paddle testing arsenal for sure. And walked around a bit. They're obviously testing for munitions as well, not the USAP, but that laboratory. So you could hear like high power guns going off, in these hallways off the main hallway. Yeah. So cool stuff. I mean, it's an impressive lab for sure. And the technicians that are performing these tests for the USAP are Element employees, but they're technicians trained in PBCoR, so they're used to doing it for baseball, and they're transferring that.
Is this aligned with like Aberdeen at all? Because there's that Aberdeen Proving Grounds near Baltimore that does a lot of this kind of testing.
I'm not sure, Eddie. I feel like I've heard something about that before, but
just curious.
Yeah, not sure. That's your stomping ground.
That's right.
Okay, and then we came back to the meeting room, and there was Q&A. Before I get to the Q&A, I want to address spin testing. So they're going to start doing spin testing too, and it sounds like they've invested quite a bit. There was a remote presentation by Daniel Bessel, who phoned in. He's from Image Systems, and they're developing what they're calling a track eye, which is going to be a turnkey system that people can purchase to measure spin. And it's a similar way that PPL is doing spin, but he went into great detail, Daniel did, about this two-camera system and why it's important to have two cameras versus just one. And he said that there are basically two components to ball spin, and that would be translation and rotation. So the way the ball is moving and the way the ball is rotating. And then there's the potential with just one camera to misassign kinetic energy. And he went into, like I said, great detail. But basically, he was one of his claims was that without the system, the results can vary with just one camera, even if it's high speed, from what he said 0 to 3,000 RPM based on the same paddle, based on where you start the time frame and where you end the frame, which frame of the video you start and end on. Now, PPL is just using one camera, but I did hear while I was there, they were explaining it to me, and they have a precise way of starting at, I think it's frame 10 and going to frame 50, something like that, because they obviously tested this and they're aware that if you start at 0, there's some kind of like the ball doesn't behave predictably from 0 to 10 frames. So they started at 10. So it'd be interesting to flesh that out as well as moving forward. Is this two-camera system dramatically more effective and accurate than what PPL is doing? So we will find out. Okay, on to the Q&A. Big drama during the Q&A. I don't know if so go check out Rafa, Pickleball Tech Dude. He posted an initial video and there, some paddle companies aren't very happy. And the reason, the source of that frustration, the main source right now is, okay, we want to follow the rules. I'm speaking on as a paddle company. We want to follow the rules. We're here at this meeting, but what's going to stop a paddle company from creating a paddle that comes in right at 0.43? They submit a new paddle. It passes. Are you testing for break-in? Are you doing destructive testing? And the consistent answer from USAP was no. That falls on the paddle companies to regulate. It falls on the paddle companies to make sure you make paddles that don't go above 0.43 during the lifespan of that paddle. And the paddle companies, Rafa was probably the biggest from Gearbox, was probably the most prominent voice there. Was like, he was like, okay. So if you're not regulating this, then certainly this is going to happen. And there are millions of dollars at stake. Consumers want the hottest paddle. They want every edge they can get. And if people are following the rules and making sure their paddles never go over 0.34 or 0.43, and they're other people that submit one that breaks in and goes up to 5.0 and it's out on the market, people are going to buy that. So it's punishing, in their words, paraphrasing, but the paddle companies there were saying it's punishing us for following the rules. Why would we do that? And Rafa was very upfront. He's like, if moving forward, there are paddle companies that slip through the cracks and their paddles start selling, then I'm going to engineer my paddle to do the same, right? Because I'm not going to miss out on those sales. And if it's just kind of allowed, and USAP was, even though they were really stubborn about, no, this is your responsibility, not ours, which everybody just was confounded. Like, why is this our responsibility? You're the regulatory agency. Like, make a rule here. Like, do some destructive testing. And at least try, but they were like, well, this is too complex. Like, what if you test a Gen 1 paddle versus a Gen 2 versus a Gen 3? Then they're all going to be different. And they're like, well, okay, make categories and calibrate your data that way. So it was infuriating being in the audience and seeing this circular argument going round and round and coming back to where it started for what seemed like hours. Now, I don't want to rip on USAP here. I'm very grateful that they invited all of us there and they're being transparent. And they were, there was never a time when they were like, we're just not going to answer that question. They would answer it, but it would always be not what people wanted. Not always. Sometimes it would be not what people wanted to hear. And it seemed, from our perspective, to be just they're sticking their foot down and being stubborn about this. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me that they would set up a system, have this amazing ball cannon and system to measure exit velocity and PBCoR, but then leave it open for people to just game it. Like, okay, make your paddle at 0.43. It breaks in to 5.50. Doesn't matter. Now it does eventually because there's a system where they can, like the secret shopper system, where if they hear rumors that a paddle is heating up, they can go buy one off the shelf or online, get it and retest it and potentially pull the certification, which they're doing that. But it's still, that doesn't fix everything. It's just it's a little bit random, and there should be, according to the paddle companies there, a system in place where everybody's held accountable for the same rules, not just we're going to hope that you're going to catch the bad guys, right? And there's no way to do it if there's not a system in place. There's no way to do it consistently across the board.
There's some major logical arguments there that make total sense to me.
Yeah.
So no real response to that to say we're going to continue to look at this or make adjustments along the way. They're pretty much holding to their process. That
issue of break-in, they were extremely stubborn on, and never once was there, well, we can consider that. And Rafa said, hey, I've got Gearbox Rafa. Hey, I've got this machine I've developed that can break a paddle in 5 minutes, and I'm pretty sure it works fantastic. You want to try this? And they're like, no, glad you had that because that's your responsibility. And we're just like, why? And I asked John, I'm like, why wouldn't you want to try it? And again,
it is their responsibility, but it's also USAP's responsibility to check into these things, enforce the rules that they have in place.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And not on a random basis or a selective basis or any kind of non-regular basis.
Right. Yeah, and that's what everybody was wanting to hear, and it didn't happen. Is that to say that it's never going to happen? No. Hopefully they are listening to everyone's feedback and will eventually make those changes. But at this point, it doesn't look promising for break-in. And again, it was always kind of like, well, it's not our responsibility, and it's very complicated and probably too complicated to actually figure out. But that argument doesn't hold any water for me because PBCoR is also very complicated, and maybe it's not figured out yet, but it's well on its way,
And presumably all these companies want dual certification, which just, that's got to be crazy.
Yeah, right. And there's different numbers and everything else. So we got onto the Ronbus issue. So the Ronbus Ripple was delisted kind of the day before it was set for release. USAP made some really strong statements and spoke specifically about Ronbus and the Ripple and said, hey, it was never USAP approved. What they said was Ronbus went through this preliminary testing system that they have in place for prototypes, which is why they said that he got that under 0.43 idea. But they said he put the cart before the horse and said that it applied to the actual ripple when it did not, and was going to release it when they had never approved it. Now, it sounds dire, right, on Ronbus, but there are two sides to the story, because I've heard directly from Dong, the owner of Ronbus, that he got a verbal confirmation, and it wasn't on a prototype basis, in his words, and B, he got the report saying it was under 4.3 before they requested more paddles, retested them, and those were out above the limit, and then they pulled the certification. So that's Dong's story. Their story is he only did the prototype and then, again, put the cart before the horse and assumed that he could release a paddle based on that when he couldn't. And then it came back to us paddle reviewers. Like, we were in the spotlight there for a second at the meeting because they were like, I think it was Carl up there. He's like, and Ronbus seeded the influencers with paddles, and then, they got all over. The news got out there, and people started buying these prototypes, the beta versions, and and it was kind of a indirect way to promote something that shouldn't have ever been promoted. And we, of course, defended ourselves. If you look on, okay, what are we to do as paddle reviewers, right? We get these paddles. There's a stamp on there, USAP approved. There's a stamp also on the newest ripple that it's PBCoR certified. So we were obviously told that this is the case, and it's still up for debate whether or not it was.
Right.
However, it's also on their website. There are 2 ripples on the USAP certified list of approved paddles. So that's what I go to verify if people are telling me the truth on whether or not their paddle is certified. So why are they on the website if they were never officially certified? It does not say prototype only. It does not say beta ripple. It says ripple R1.14, ripple R2.14, approved, certified. So a lot of confusion there. I don't know what to think of it. It seems like I don't know what to think. That's all I should say about it, but it's kind of a hot mess, to be honest.
For sure.
Yeah. And then they did take some responsibility for kind of messing up the whole chorus fire paddle thing.
Oh, interesting.
That was delisted, and they said, we didn't follow our own protocols. We just pulled it without giving a reason, and we should have given that reason. So I need to speak with Matt of Chorus to get more details, but as of now, they pulled it, then it was back on, and then it's unsure if it's staying on. So not sure there. But it was nice to hear them kind of fess up and be like, yeah, we kind of screwed up on this one. That's all we want to hear, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I loved hearing from these guys. Never once was it kind of snooty and like,
Sure.
We've got the answers, we're not going to give it to you. They were very open. Again, there was a lot of kind of circularity in terms of how this conversation went, and they doubled down on a lot of things. But at least they put themselves out there and got some, allowed themselves to be questioned and had a conversation. Do I think it's what the end result of that media day is what they wanted? Absolutely not. There's been a lot of kind of like, wow, there's some glaring issues here. Another part of the thing about PBCoR is there were several issues that were brought up that according to the methodology, is this methodology correct, or is it just kind of being brought over from baseball without thinking too much about it? And it seemed like a mix of both, right? They're tailoring it towards pickleball in some ways, but there's unknowns that could be affecting the outcome, and maybe even cumulatively. What I mean by that is like somebody asked, and this is something that we've been having conversations as paddle reviewers. It was brought up by Justin of Pickball, et cetera, to me first. He's like, all right, they're clamping the paddle, but what about the pallets used on the paddle to create the handle? If it's an EVA foam pallet, won't that be like a spring that's going to be bouncier than a fully formed PU handle, or even the Gearbox solid carbon fiber handles? Isn't that going to mess up the results? And that's a really good question. Somebody actually brought that up at the meeting, and John from USAP is like, yeah, that's potentially an issue. We're not sure about that yet. He's like, that's probably a spring if you have a squishy handle. And he's like, but it's probably not going to affect the outcome too much. And then somebody, while we were in the laboratory looking at the cannon, was like, how tight do you clamp the handle? And he gave a really nondescript answer, like a whole bunch, right? We clamped the heck out of it, I think is what he said. And that's, doesn't seem right. Maybe it doesn't affect the paddle, the rebound of the paddle, but it didn't seem like he knew the answer to that. And I think it was Braden that brought up in the conversation in the Q&A, like, okay, you have all of these, a few of these unknown variables, won't they add up to, potentially give you misleading results in the end? And that's a concern that I think most of us came out of that meeting having. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, John, I'm not sure if you're prepared to talk about it, but how does all of this inform what you're doing here at Q Studios in terms of your own testing regime?
Good question. We'll do a little tour of the Q Studio in a minute, or the Q Lab. Take a look at my Canon, but suffice it to say, I'm not going to get as accurate of results as either of these labs. They're controlling many more variables. My Canon, for example, is not a piston cannon, and it's going to have a little bit of spin on the ball, so I can't control which part of the ball hits the paddle, that sort of stuff. But I'm coming along, and I'm really confident that I'm going to get really good data, much better data than what I'm currently doing.
Did you get any takeaways that you're going to put into implementation here?
Yeah, for sure. And all of them were very open at PPL, and I think I could also chat with Carl and John at USAP to pick their brains also. But yeah, they're all pretty excited that I'm trying this as well as a paddle reviewer. So there's no competitive, you can't do this, you're not qualified enough.
Right, right.
But yeah, it'll be fun to see where mine triangulate with, both the PPL and the USAP.
Yeah, I was really excited to see the hole you blasted through your own wall.
We'll take a look at that too. The first shot I hit with a cannon, I may have misestimated the air pressure needed to get to 60. Okay, so overall impressions of both labs. Now, I'm going to provide a caveat here because I was the only person at the PPL lab, so it wasn't like there were a bunch of paddle companies there asking diverse questions and kind of putting pressure on them. I tried to ask poignant questions when I could, but there was just me, and it wasn't, the atmosphere could have been quite different if people were asking more diverse questions than what I had.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of frustration with the USAP, so that kind of definitely influenced the nature of the conversation. But I'm just going to kind of give you my 10,000-foot view comparing both. So I will say that they're using slightly different methodologies, right? So the ball spin is, does it matter that there's just one camera at PPL versus the two-camera method that USAP is eventually going to adopt? We'll see. And Curtis will be happy to be interviewed specifically about that, because it sounds like they've done pretty extensive research on their system and they think it's highly accurate. Also, does qualifying a ball matter? Does using a ball with holes versus without holes matter? Which one's better? Which one's worse? I think time will tell. And various other differences in methods. And the last topic I discussed, this concern that, okay, all these different variables that we were not sure affect the outcome, and maybe individually affect the outcome very minimally, but together it may screw up the end result. So that's an issue maybe for both laboratories, right? And hopefully both laboratories are open to feedback and doing internal investigations and research to find those variables. And I know that, I know they are. I know both laboratories are doing that, but that could. What it seems like right now is that PBCoR is well on its way to becoming a very valid, the best way of directly testing a paddle's return of energy, but maybe it's not there yet in terms of the methods, and just adopting those methods wholesale from baseball and not tailoring them to pickleball as needed. You know what I mean? Okay, there's also a difference in terms of the qualifications and the staff, or their backgrounds, I should say, because both the staff at USAP and PPL, who services UPA-A, are extremely qualified for their jobs. They're all engineer-based, but there's a it's skewed in terms of their background. So at USAP and Element Lab, it's mostly aerospace background. So John, at the chief engineer at USAP, he retired after 42 years in the aerospace industry. He was chief engineer for United Technologies, and he worked on the Boeing 787. So, and there's clearly crossovers from that. They use polypropylene in Boeings and carbon fiber and that sort of stuff, and they do the same sort of testing. So, but there's an aerospace focus for USAP, and then there's a sports equipment testing focus for UPA-A's lab at PPL. And, quite an extensive roster of people who are very influential in developing PBCoR for baseball and softball, directly influencing and teaching. It was a mentor of Curtis and people currently, Curtis from Washington State University, people currently at UMass Lowell, all integrated together in that laboratory. So, will that make a difference one way or the other? I don't know, but it's certainly interesting to see the different backgrounds of the engineers at both laboratories. Yeah. So all that being said, I think both labs are highly legitimate. It was a real eye-opener to see, what the labs look like, what the equipment looks like, how they're using the equipment, and pick the brains of the engineers as well. And I still kind of hold to this idea that I don't like that there's two competing organizations certifying paddles, but I think it's the opposite is the case for having two laboratories testing equipment, because I think that actually benefits the whole, because it's not that it's competition necessarily, but you're getting different think tanks coming at the problem differently and deriving the solution, and it's going to be more apparent. It'll probably push progress forward more quickly having two labs working on this at the same time from different directions. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think
diversity
that's actually...
of thought.
What's that?
Diversity of thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good thing, actually, that the PPL is out there doing something in parallel to the USAP.
Exciting trip, John.
Yeah. We need to get a yawn counter. Actually, you did really well. I didn't see you yawn once throughout that 30 minutes.
We edited.
Okay. Eddie, you want to go take a look at the ball cannon?
Yeah, let's go.
The Q Labs?
Let's go.
Right.
I actually took a picture here, but let's go.
All right. So this is the setup. Got our cannon here, which I don't think it's quite as powerful as we need. Then I got the speed gates here, one for inbound, one for outbound, and the paddle clamp. And I tried to model it after what both USAP and UPA-A are using, so it is rotating.
It's pretty free.
Yeah. And I was racking my brain to figure out how to mount it. And I found this as like a studio lighting thing, like for concerts, for the rotating lights. And then I finally realized, I'm a drummer. They make these racks for drums for repeated, like hard percussion.
Perfect.
And this is perfect. It's a rack from
You think it was built
Gibraltar.
for this purpose.
That's right. And it's all powered by a air compressor. A pressure regulator down there, which is to fine-tune the pressure to get the speed we need. And what kind of pressure are you looking for? Let's just say it's about 1/100th of what this is capable of producing. So the first shot, I kind of aimed it off of the table here, and it created a hole in the wall. I do have regular balls and balls without holes. Mm-hmm. So eventually I'm going to get it set up where I get the MOI, the moment of inertia, and all that in a calculation, but we can get a rough COR from here. I'm also getting another speed gate made by Keith Mouse. He's an engineer who's going to help me out with creating his own speed gate, which is going to be more accurate than this. One of the issues with this is the inbound velocity is closer to the cannon than the outbound velocity, so it's going to naturally, the ball's going to be coming out faster and losing speed before it hits the paddle, so it's going to deflate the coefficient of restitution with this setup. So the speed gate he's making is more similar to the ones that the agencies are using. All right, so we're ready, Eddie.
Hold on.
Here we go.
Holy crap. That was so fast I couldn't even like really see what was going on.
121 feet per second. So 82 miles an hour. All right, little overshot there. Let's go again. All right, you ready?
Yeah, I am ready.
3, 2, 1. I don't think that bounced through. All right, that was 105 inbound. Oh, we got it. We can do a rough calculation here. So we got a 0.29 COR. And again, that's not calculating moment of inertia or swing weight or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But that's actually lower than a lot of the other paddles I was testing. They were coming in low to mid 0.3s. So at 0.29, that's not a very big COR. And that's the course fire.
So that was ball coming in at, what did you say, 71 miles per hour?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And leaving or bouncing off and returning at what? 30 something?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
that is crazy.
It's on its way. Like I said, I'm getting a better speed gate. We'll figure out ways we'll incorporate the MOI into the calculations and all that. And eventually we're going to have what should we call the measurement? Not PBCoR, that's USAP.
I think you got to call it the Q factor.
The Q factor. KewCoR, maybe KewCoR. All right. I need to get an OSHA representative in my basement.
I need some safety glasses.
All right. So let's get on to your favorite segment, Paddles of the Week.
Yes, of course. Where do you want to start?
Let's give an update on the 11624 power paddles because they are coming out this Friday, and I will be reviewing them. And I have not made this a secret, but I have a new main. It's been not new, but for the past several weeks, my main has been the hybrid shape of the 11624.
The Vapor.
The Vapor.
Yeah. Great paddle.
A really good paddle. And, I started playing with it to review it and just kept coming back to it. And eventually I was like, this is my main.
That shape is really unique, and it's kind of like the best of all worlds. It's got a little bit of the elongated, it's got a little bit of the hybrid action going. Of the three shapes, that Vapor is, it's really over the top.
Yeah. At first I didn't quite like the top, how squared off the corners are on the top of the paddle, but I've gotten used to it. It's probably not my favorite looking shape aesthetically, but I don't think it looks bad. But man, it plays great. Power's not obscene. There's definitely no danger of this being, well, I shouldn't say that. We don't know if any paddle's going to get disqualified or decertified based on PBCoR yet. But it does not compare at all in terms of the output of firepower to some of the most powerful paddles on the market.
In mine, I've seen very little break-in on mine. So I really don't see that it would be vaulting above that standard anytime soon.
That's a good point, Eddie. Very little break-in. It does get a little bit more forgiving, I'd say, but the power output is, I think I actually measured it. I did. I've been playing with this now for 6 weeks, really consistently, and I got a new batch of paddles in and tested this one side by side with another new Vapor. Mm-hmm. And this one got, I think it was 1% increase in power and pop. So very, very subtle, but nothing that changes the nature.
You've got a little bit of weight on there. Did you have weight on the other one?
No, I didn't. So that's going to add a little bit of power as well. So I do have 3 grams of the tungsten strips, Braden's tungsten strips at 4 and 8 o'clock. I don't think it needs much more than that. I mean, the sweet spot on this thing is stock, very large, and with just a little bit of weight, it's an excellent sweet spot.
That Pegasus shape also has a very generous sweet spot.
Yeah.
I haven't played with the Huarache yet, but those 2 other shapes, pretty incredible.
All 3 shapes are great. If you're an elongated paddle person, then the Huarache is definitely your shape. And same for wide body Pegasus. The width of the Pegasus sweet spot is great. You won't find much of a wider sweet spot.
And good spin too.
And I don't know why, I've been playing with wide bodies consistently now for months, and I gravitated to the hybrid Vapor instead. I don't know. I didn't feel like I was giving up too much in terms of the width of the sweet spot. You're gaining a little bit of length of sweet spot as well. But something about the balance of the paddle and everything just kind of came together for this Vapor to be my favorite of the three.
Agree.
But highly subjective. So, choose if you're going to get one when they come out on Friday. Choose based on whatever paddle shape you prefer, you've been playing with and you prefer.
I've not seen folks use really anything but the Vapor recently. So it's I think it's going to be a very popular shape.
I think so too. I think all the other paddle reviewers that I have heard talk about it, that's their favorite shape too. So if you're thinking about getting a hybrid, you better jump on it quick on Friday probably, because I don't know how many he has in stock unless you're willing to wait, because they will probably go out of stock.
Yeah, and the price is good too.
The price is great, yeah. So the grit on the newest production models we got is a little less pronounced than these early production models, and that's just kind of a process that happens. Like the factories in China will send out paddles to distribute to reviewers, and they'll put some pretty steep grit on there, really close to the limit, right? Or maybe even above it sometimes. Not that this was in any way, intentional by 11624, but my initial RPM spin numbers that you'll see in my database right now were really high, 2,300 or so. And I retested the spin yesterday on the newest production models, and they were a little lower, around 2,100 on average. So there'll be a slight reduction in spin compared to what we're used to on this, but they're still really good spin and very typical of raw carbon fiber paddles.
Have you had a chance to hit with the all-court models?
Yeah, they're really solid paddles. Poppier than what I remembered.
Not a tremendous decrease in power.
No.
Yeah.
So, all good stuff from 11624. Let's move on to second paddle on the list here, Eddie. Gearbox sent some prototypes out.
Really interesting.
They don't do that. This is the first time they've sent out prototypes, and they sent it out to most paddle reviewers as well. However, I got the only hyper, and then since they knew I liked the hyper shape, and so that's the only one out there right now. Not only is this the first time they sent out prototypes, but look at these paddles. They don't look like gearboxes, do they?
No, they look like stealth fighters or something. They're unbranded. They're just flying through the night.
Right. And they have edge guards, which is unusual.
When you told me it was an SST core, I didn't believe you at first.
Mm-hmm. Until you played with it?
Right.
Yeah, so they still have SST cores, so the carbon fiber ribs with foam perimeter, similar build to the latest iteration of the SST core and the Pro Ultimates, but different. Raphael keeps tweaking the formula for the SST cores, and in these, the goal was to get something that was well below PBCoR and to ensure that it never exceeded the power limit, even after break-in. Now, I talked with Rafa about this for a good while, about these paddles, and among several things, but the break-in he thinks is going to be less pronounced than what you experience with any of the previous SST cores, starting with the power paddles last year and moving into the Ultimates this year, and now these. And again, the overarching goal is to come in less powerful than even the Ultimates, and make a more palatable paddle for the masses. And not that this is like a beginner's paddle or anything like that, but people love edge guards on their paddles because it does tend to broaden out the sweet spot. And he put an edge guard. And also you can see the facing material is different than their other paddles. It's a 3K woven cloth with a peel ply over the top of it. So this is the hyper shape. You have an elongated and their Integra shape, which are nearly identical. I mean, look at the difference between those. It looks like a 1/4 inch longer, and they play pretty close. So they re-engineered their Integra shape, made the handle a little longer, and I think the overall length of the paddle grew with the handle. I would like to see a little more. I feel like there's room for some more width on this to make it a true hybrid and to kind of max out the dimensions. It's still that below 7.5 inches in width, it's like 7.3 or something. And it's even with an edge guard, that's just not a lot of real estate side to side.
Let's stack that hyper up there as well. I'm curious to see what the length looks like in comparison because it feels like there's room for extra handle length.
On the hyper?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're leaving room on the table on all of these. Maybe not the Integra because they did increase the overall length of it. But, I think I would love the hyper, like you said, with a little bit longer handle and maybe a little more taper on the neck. Because once you can enlarge the handle, then it's not so much a hindrance for your two-handed backhand, this taper. So with a little wider taper, it's going to add a little more twist weight and broaden out that sweet spot a little more. So I think shapes could use some improvement. But what do you feel about the performance of the paddles?
I've really enjoyed playing with these. I thought the sweet spot was so much more enhanced than previous Gearbox offerings. That alone is probably worth the price of admission right there. Super. I mean, plenty of poppiness, I thought. I can see where they're sort of detuning the power a little bit, but not so much in pop. Yeah,
I like the feel of these. It's really plush, kind of dwelly feel. And I'd still call it, I want to call this a power paddle also.
I would say so.
Yeah, like right on that boundary of all court.
Certainly a year ago, we would have easily put this in the power category.
You and I were hitting with this yesterday, side by side with some other paddles. So we had it side by side with the chorus paddles, and these were definitely hitting harder than the Supercourts, which hit harder than I expected the Supercourts did.
Yeah.
So I put the Supercourts in all court leaning power. I put this closer to the power side of the spectrum, if not in it. And these are new, so they're not broken in. But there's also a pleasant sound when you hit them. They're very quiet. They don't have the high-pitched tone. I think these are going to be quiet approved also. And maybe a little bit more spin would be nice. The peel ply on Gearbox paddles is always very conservative, and maybe that's just where it should be to ensure it passes. I don't know. Maybe they're following the rules and maybe getting punished a bit for it because us paddle reviewers are being honest with what we feel about the paddles in terms of spin and power. But nevertheless, if these got the same spin as the 11624s and the new carbon true foam paddles, that kind of dip on the ball would really, I feel like, round out these paddles in a big way.
What were your impressions of the sweet spot, John?
Sweet spot's good, bigger. It's on the hyper, it's biggest, but I was even able to play with the elongated and the Integra, which I don't enjoy playing with those shapes in any of the other Gearbox paddles, but I was able to do it on these. Yeah, it's a narrow sweet spot on these, following the dimensions, but no less narrow than a same shaped paddle in a thermoform Gen 2 paddle. And the sweet spot on the hyper is good. It follows the width of the paddle, and it's wider side to side. I needed a little more time. I did feel maybe some dead spots. I think you mentioned that too in the paddle. Maybe that's just the prototype nature of the paddles. Overall, I mean, sweet spot's good. I wouldn't call it oversized, but I'd say it's probably average for paddles of its shape.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that dead spot issue a sweet spot issue. It's just there's just a couple of little areas on the face, particularly on that elongated model, where the outcome was definitely not what I was expecting. So we'll keep an eye on that.
They're not overly heavy either. I was able to put weight on them without feeling like they're too heavy in my hand. So I like it. I'm glad that Gearbox is, continuing to innovate and also sending out paddles for us to take a look at before they're on the market. I do want to say that I'm going to be more cautious moving forward reviewing prototypes, given what's happening with the Ripple. I feel like we did everything, as we should have with the Ripple, but there was a lot of buildup leading up. We had no idea that, it was going to be delayed so much. We had no idea that it was going to be pulled right before its release. However, I feel confident talking about these gearboxes because there's no way in my mind that they're at risk for being pulled from the list for power or anything else, right? And the history of Gearbox, they've always walked, well, they produced the power paddles. They gave the market what they wanted. At that time, there was no limit on power, and since then they've pulled it back, and they're following the regulations that they always have. So I feel confident talking about those, but I don't want to ever get into another situation again like what happened with the Ripple. It's going to be hard to see it coming, but anytime there's a paddle that comes our way that's I feel like is flirting with that boundary and power, I don't think I want to talk about it on the pod before it's actually released. It's not fair to other paddle manufacturers. It's not fair to if Ronbus is telling the truth and their side of the story is true, it's also not fair to them because so much hype got built up and they may end up getting punished for this. It's not fair to USAP if their side of the story is true also because they only approved a prototype of the Ripple and then all of us paddle reviewers thought it was certified when it wasn't and got a bunch of buzz behind it and a bunch of people have it now. It's a sticky issue moving forward.
Yeah, great point, John. I do think there is some information that can be garnered from using a prototype paddle, particularly if there's new technologies being integrated into the construction of the paddle. I do think it's worth playing with those just to see and feel what those technologies are like, but not coming to any real conclusions about what that means on the court.
Yeah.
Or certainly in tournament play.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to the next paddle, shall we? Chorus is coming out with a couple new models. So we have the Supercourt X series coming out February 11th. It's been a little bit delayed, but it will be released at noon Eastern on February 11th.
In 3 shapes.
3 shapes. I just have the hybrid here, so the HX. It's also an EX and an SX, so elongated and standard, short. These are very different than the original Supercourts.
It really should be named something else.
They should have never named the original one Supercourt if they wanted to use it.
Yes.
Because that one had the super long handle and the little circular heads. It looked really funny. And it played completely differently. Yeah. It was very much soft control paddle. These, they're advertised as all-court paddles. They hit much harder and poppier than I was expecting. So the layup on these, so they're fully thermoformed and they have a CFC layup. So soft carbon fiber top layer, and the layup middle layer is fiberglass, and then another soft carbon fiber bottom layer. So to compare this to another all-court paddle they have, the Shapeshifter, the fiberglass is a little more shallow in the layup on this because the Shapeshifter is on the bottom. That was 3 layers. The fiberglass is the 3rd layer down. Here's the 2nd layer down. And I definitely felt that, I don't know if it's entirely due to the fiberglass layer being more shallow or what, but this one is a lot hotter than the Shapeshifter. The newest Shapeshifters are, I'd say, all court leaning control.
Right.
And this is definitely all court leaning power. Yeah. So it's a good place to be for this paddle so as not to confuse it with the Shapeshifter, and it's clearly a different facing layer too. The Shapeshifter.
Do you think there's enough distinction between these and the Fire though?
Well, I guess the Fire is now relevant. We'll see. Yeah, I do though. I feel like these are much more forgiving in terms of the feel you get, less stiff and jarring.
I actually agree with that.
Yeah, but in terms of the firepower, not much difference than the Fire, than the ones we got. I heard a lot of discrepancies in the models of the Fire that were sent out to reviewers. Some of them were just like, these things are tanks. They hit like cannons. And then the ones we got were, entry-level power paddles. They weren't overly hot, by any means. These little less powerful than the Fires that we got, but not by much.
Yeah.
Less than I expected.
Yeah.
Overall, I like it a lot.
Same.
I like this the HX the best in the shape too. Maybe just in general, I'm bouncing back to hybrid shapes, but Again, something about the balance, the extra reach. The SX, their wide body, feels really short to me. It's maybe not any shorter than others, but for some reason, the way the paddle plays just feels like.
I had to consciously think about where the sweet spot was going to be on that SX. It's really close to the hand.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
And that was just a little too much intellectual firepower that I had at the moment.
Yeah.
But that HX shape, I think, is it's kind of a one size fits all, right?
Yeah, for sure. Looks like I forgot to ask what the cell size on the polypropylene was, but looking at the ball dust on this, it looks like narrow cell. I don't know for sure though. Okay, also a denser foam perimeter and a better handle. It is the squishy foam, but it's denser, so it's EVA, but a little bit denser. I'm not going to rip on Chorus for putting EVA foam pellets on this paddle because it is very cheap. The price, not the paddle. Paddle plays great. It's a high quality paddle, but they're going to have to cut some corners someplace to get the price down to $119 retail. Amazing. And then $108 for code. So for that price, really good buy.
Yeah, I'm so happy Chorus has not gone with the whole gradient edge guard because it's a trend that is coming up quite a bit lately that I don't care for.
Right.
So thanks, Matt, for not going with the crowd on that one.
Yes, indeed. Then we've also got the Echo series, and these are even more of a budget option for people. So they come in at $109
You're not
retail.
giving up anything.
No, $99 after code for these. I'm not sure. They originally slated to release February 10th. I'm not sure if that's still on track or they're going to come after the Supercourt. But these are also fully thermoformed. So at that price point, I don't think you find many other fully thermoformed paddles. You get Gen 1.5 paddles, which are basically thermoformed, but slightly less pressure and heat. But these are fully thermoformed. It comes in all three shapes also, and it plays great. It plays really similar to the Supercourt, just a little bit more muted overall to me. What do you think of it, Eddie?
Might be the best $99 you can spend, or less than $100.
Yeah,
right.
And especially for an all-court paddle.
Yeah.
I think most of the really exceptional $100 paddles are control-oriented paddles, So this one comes in, a slightly different power level. And yeah, I'd put this, I don't know, I need more time with it, but in terms of its classification, all-court, right in the center of all-court.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Chorus now has 3 paddle shapes in 4, kind of price points and power levels. For me, it's the Supercourt HX out of those 12 offerings.
Yeah, unless you're really, pinching your pennies and you don't want to spend the extra $10, I would go for the Supercourt all day. Yeah, it just feels a little bit, it feels better. Now
So over the shapeshifter.
Exactly. So the difference in the layup over the shapeshifter.
Yeah.
I mentioned the Echo. Right. Let me table that for a second. So the Supercourt versus the Echo. The Echo's layup is also it doesn't have the fiberglass in there, which is probably the entire reason why we're feeling the difference in firepower. A little bit of difference in feel. The Supercourt's definitely poppier than the Echo. But I just like the feel of the Supercourt better. It matches my play style better. And
Agree.
I get better response out of it. Now, compared to the shapeshifter, that's a really good question. Since I mained the shapeshifter for months early this year or late last year, mid last year, I can't remember. But I feel like the game has evolved now, or maybe I've changed as a player to where I need a little bit more power in my paddles. I'm maybe a little more comfortable with that level of firepower and controlling it than I used to be. But yeah, today I would definitely choose the Supercourt over the current iteration of the shapeshifter.
Yeah, I think your Hayden Patriquin little backhand punch really goes well with that Supercourt.
It's very poppy.
Yeah,
right.
It comes back in a hurry.
Yeah, that's it for our paddles of the week.
We did a little showdown this week again.
Yeah,
actually, talk about that or no?
Yeah, so we did play with another paddle, which was released yesterday. So the Selkirk Labs 008. We talked about this a couple weeks ago or last week. We had a showdown between that and the Supercourt.
Supercourt HX.
Yeah,
played 4 games where we sort of alternated paddles, alternated sides of the court, trying to even things out, narrow it down to just the paddles.
Right.
Right.
You want to talk
unscientific, but it's the best we can do.
Hey, it's It's exact science. We're talking about physics here, Eddie. We're talking about physics. You want to talk about your experience in the Showdown?
You know what? First, I played with the 008 a little bit a couple weeks ago, and I felt, man, this thing is just way too soft. I can't really generate anything with this. You showed up with it with good bit of weight on the perimeter, and that just opened up the power curve on this battle a little bit. And I played really well with it.
Same. I was, not to be totally agreeable, but so I put roughly 10 grams of tungsten total, so 5 grams on each side, extending from the neck up to nearly the top of the paddle. And I agree that this transformed the paddle into a state that I enjoyed playing with. Whereas before, all of these 008 stock come super low swing weight. It's a full foam core.
Mm-hmm.
I have not gotten a chance to x-ray it, but I've seen Braden's x-rays, and there's nothing in it. It's just the x-ray is literally a blank slate. You see the edge guard and then nothing in the center. There's no internal weighting, which I feel like maybe they missed the opportunity to do something there because they are so light stocked. And why not stick some lateral weighting, broaden that sweet spot?
Seems obvious.
Play around with the balance point. However, I will give them kudos for changing the Invicta shape and making it a slightly longer handle. So to me, this is the first time I've played with an Invicta that I was like, okay, I can play with this shape. I don't need something different. I think they are still leaving dimensions on the table. They didn't widen it out as long as they could have, which these days I feel like is a little old-fashioned. But nevertheless, want to give Selkirk props for improving the Invicta shape. And yeah, I agree that this paddle, I'm not mad at it. Once I put all this weight on it, I was like, ooh, okay. And it
doesn't feel like a hammer. I mean, that's a lot of weight. You put that on just about any other paddle and it's going to be unusable. But on here, it works.
I mean, compared to the 007.
The 007 was
beep. All day I'll play with it, right? With the 008. And it has... in terms of overall feel, I'll let you speak to that, but I would say there's a little bit of similarity to like the carbon true foam in the sense that, it's a full foam core. They're different. I get more dwell time on the true foam, but there's kind of that, it's a hollow foam feel that you're getting with both. And it's not hollow in a bad way, but it's different than polypropylene and from Gen 3 foam enhanced cores with polypropylene centers or the Gearbox, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the Selkirk legacy with the 003 and the Lux, I think carries over into this a little bit in feel. With that dwell time and that softness. To me, it actually feels softer than the carbon.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we just spun off into another review of the 008. Let's get back to our...
So game one, you started with the 008. I started with the Supercourt, and you smoked my hiney. we played to 8, and the resulting score of that first game was a big goose egg for Eddie.
Well, you came back and won the next 3, so I'd say that you got your act together. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, I like the paddle, fine, but I like the Supercourt better. And I was like, I can't pickle Eddie with the Selkirk because that's going to ruin my score. but yeah, it happened. And then you came back and won soundly the next 3 games. So my end score was the 008 outscored the Supercourt by 1 point.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What was your end result?
Well, we had the same end result because...
because you started with 0 on the Supercourt. But was that 1 point differential? Do you know?
No, I actually don't know.
Okay.
I actually don't know.
So interesting, fun way to test the paddles. So the 008 won in head-to-head comparison. However, I will say that if I had to choose between the two, it would be the Supercourt all day, especially since there's a $200 price differential between those 2 paddles.
Price aside, I wouldn't say Supercourt all day. I think that I could play with either one really well. And situationally, I might want the pop of the Supercourt, but in other cases, if I'm maybe driving the ball from the midcourt or I'm looking for a little bit of control,
there you go.
008 might be the one for me that day.
All right, Eddie. Mr. Bank Account. $333 is more than $200 difference.
Yeah, and how many models are there? I need one of each. A couple grand.
Okay, but yeah, fun stuff. And I do think that the 008 is, let's see, which of the Labs series do you think the 008 is better than? So definitely the 007.
All of them.
Even the 002 and the 003?
Yeah.
You main the 00. Oh, okay. Let's phrase it this way. We'll frame it this way. According to when it was released and what the impact it had on the paddle landscape at the time, where would you put the 008?
Oh, geez. Maybe in the top half,
Okay.
but not, leading the pack in terms of where it is stacked up against every other paddle. Is that what you're saying?
No, only the Lab series. So I'd say that 002 is probably the top of the list in terms of when they were released. Like, it was a pretty revolutionary paddle when it was released. 003 probably second, right? That was the Lux, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then 008, then I don't know where the others fall.
Yeah, so top half.
4, 5, 6, and 7 were just kind of
They just kind of disappeared to me.
Not even sleepers, but yeah. And 7 was, in my mind, subjectively not a good paddle.
I do think Selkirk is onto something here with the full foam. And I think, as you alluded, with some perimeter weighting, with some playing around with dimensions, they could be onto a real class leader.
Yeah. I mean, it's not only a blank slate in terms of the X-ray, but it's a blank slate in terms of what they want to take the paddle in terms of internal weighting and everything else you just mentioned.
Yep.
All
Would you
right.
spend $333 of your own money on it?
No. No, I wouldn't. But, there are people that love the Labs program and love Selkirk, and they will spend that much money on it.
Best head cover in the industry. It is.
Yeah, their hats?
No, their head cover.
What's that?
It's the full paddle cover.
Oh,
It's
okay. The
got
paddle cover,
kind of a
okay.
quilted look to it.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, it's better than that hard case they sent the 007s in.
Exactly.
Can you imagine walking onto the CoR with a briefcase, opening your paddle?
I like your Ben Johns Yola.
The golden yellow. I only paid $1,000 for this. All right, let's
right,
move on to
moving
gear
on.
of the week. So we have with us, so you haven't got a chance to hit with these, but you can give me your initial impressions on how you think they'll play and how they look. But I wanted to talk about kind of the stick-on butt caps that we're seeing coming out today. So Slyce originally released the speed cap, which is a replaceable cap that goes on the bottom of your handle. And then Flick Weights came out with these stickable weights that you just stick on the base of your paddle.
So much more convenient.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest complaints about the Slyce speed caps is that it was difficult to take your wrap off and then your original stock cap off and then replace it with the caps. So they do come in different weights. So Flick Weights are copper versus the Slyce speed coins. So Slyce is also in the game now. The Slyce speed coins are brass. So copper, brass. Flick Weights come in a lighter weight distribution than do the Slyce ones. So Flick Weights come in 3 grams, 6 grams, 9 grams, and 18 grams versus the speed coins from Slyce, which they start at 10 grams and go up to 28 grams.
In both cases, do you buy them individually?
Individually, you mean not stacking?
No, do you pick a weight and buy it, or do you get like a little package of?
Oh, you pick a weight and buy it.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
Maybe they have. I know that Slyce doesn't. I didn't see it on the website, but maybe Flick has an assortment package. Can you hand me that C45 behind you?
Yep, you bet.
So I put one of the Slyce speed coins on the base of this handle. Now, there are a couple of ways to do it. There are some paddles which already have a recess in the butt of the handle. It's like this Chorus Echo. And literally you just stick it right into that recess. They fit in there perfectly, right? Mm-hmm. However, there are other paddles that have like their insignia on the base of the paddle. Yes, so the Apes, you can feel it's almost like a bubble.
Right.
And the Franklin C45 also had one on. And you just install the caps. You just pop this off. You slip a little knife under there. It's also an adhesive. And then stick on your sticky weight. So I put 10 grams on here. Another thing to mention is that, some people are probably saying, okay, the Slyce speed cap is 28 grams, so 1 ounce total. Then I'd probably want to stick on a 28 gram speed coin to replace that. Well, there's also the issue of taking off your stock butt cap reduces the weight of the paddle. And it's about, I want to say like 8 to 12 grams total, including the staples that you have to take out of there. So the point of that is that with a 28 gram Slyce speed coin and your stock butt cap on, it's going to be heavier than replacing the stock butt cap with a 28 gram Slyce cap. So what I put on this one is a 10 gram cap. And, this is another tabula rasa blank slate paddle to play around with perimeter weighting. The C45 starts at a super low stock weight, static weight, and swing weight. And I also added, 10 to 12 grams total of tungsten tape, and then with the Slyce cap. And I'm really liking the way this paddle plays compared to the stock C45.
Sorry, what speed cap do you have on there?
This is a 10 gram.
10 gram.
In the Slyce. And so the differences between these two, negligible. I think they're the same price also, or close to the same. So the Slyce speed coins are $7.50 per coin. I think it's really similar. Oh, sorry. That's Juju. For the flick weights. I will say that I like the way the Slyce ones are crafted. They have not a beveled edge, but there's less, it's a rounded edge to them. So there's less kind of sharpness feeling. They also look a little better, I'd say, than
that looks fantastic.
The flick weights. However, I did hear from the flick weight owner that they are making some adjustments to the weights so that you don't have those sharp corners. So they're also rounding off the edges. And some other things. Now, one issue to be concerned about with adding these weights to your paddle is that if you add the thicker ones, the 28 gram ones or the 18 gram one, and your paddle is already at its limit in terms of the rule of 24, so the total length plus the total width in inches can't go over 24, then you're potentially at risk of going out of spec for your paddle in sanctioned tournament play. Now, has anybody ever measured your paddle in a tournament? I haven't for me, but still, if that's something that you're concerned about, then be mindful. Take a ruler out and measure length and width to make sure you don't go over that total of 24. And you probably don't want to stack several on top of each other for various reasons, but also because you could put your paddle out of spec. But overall, I do like the ability to easily stick these on and also manipulate them. So, I feel like 10 grams is noticeable, but not too much, and it doesn't add too much weight. But it's going to be entirely dependent on A, the person, and B, the paddle they start with. Like if you start sticking these on an already heavy paddle stock, then you're going to need something much less, like the 3 gram. But, with something that's very light stock, then you can go hog wild.
That's really fantastic. The only problem I ever had with the traditional speed cap was that you really couldn't experiment with it. It was on or it wasn't, and you had to go through all these gyrations to change it. But with this, it's just stick on, stick off, and you're good to go.
Yeah,
I love the experimentation.
Adds a little bit of flash to your paddle.
Yeah, that looks really good.
Yeah. All right, Eddie. That'll wrap it up for today.
All right.
We've run out of time. We can't take user questions, but please leave some comments in the YouTube video of this podcast.
Absolutely.
We'll pick a few and address them next week.
Sounds good. Thank you, John.
All right, Eddie.
Good stuff.
Have a good one.